What's going on, guys? My name is Jay. I'm a sharp sports bettor in the city of Las Vegas, Nevada, aka the sports gambling capital of the world. And in this video, I'm going to discuss the math of making money betting sports. Most bettors have a very watered down understanding of positive EV betting, and that's just because most sports bettors simply don't like math. They don't like doing the numbers, right? The actual calculations that go into it. And that's unfortunate because when you do that, when you ignore the math and the actual numbers that goes into sports betting, what you do is you expose yourself not only to a losing strategy, but to scams and just not knowing what you're doing, right? Without math, sports betting can quickly become a fool's errand. But if you understand the underlying mathematics of it and you have a good foundation on what it really means to mathematically profit from sports betting, then you will do just that. You will profit from sports betting because you understand the underlying mechanisms of what's necessary to profit. This isn't even to say that you necessarily need advanced math skills to be good at sports betting, but you need to have some fundamental idea of what you're trying to accomplish mathematically. See, you can understand the math behind it and make money intentionally, but you're always going to be scratching your head wondering what's happening if you don't understand the actual math of what's going on. Really having a thorough grasp on the mathematics is really the first step to actually making money doing this, right? It's really the first step to actually being sharp and understanding what you're doing. So, a few definitions that I want to go over and I want to talk about. One is a true win rate or an odds adjusted win rate. I see a lot of bettors who like to report numbers like 89%, 75% win rate, right? And that sounds good to somebody who's new to sports betting, right? Who doesn't really know what's going on. But the problem is that that's being a little bit disingenuous. It's being a bit dishonest with what you're actually accomplishing. See, when you are a sports bettor, you have to report the odds that you're betting at. Okay, it's the only way to actually be fair about your skill level. Saying that you just win at 75% sounds good, but if you're not saying the odds that you're betting at or that you're hitting that 75% at, then you're just being dishonest. So, for example, if I win 40% of the set of all bets I place at plus 130 odds, then my win rate on plus 130 odds is 40%. I have to tell you that I'm betting at plus 130 odds, right? I have to explain that in order for the 40% to be relevant. Again, if I say I'm winning 80% of my bets, I have to tell you what odds I'm betting at. So if I win 80% of the set of all bets I place at minus 300, then my win rate on minus 300 is 80%. Only saying the win rate is being disingenuous. That's being dishonest. That's being too ambiguous. You have to tell people, you have to explain what odds you're betting at. Another definition is flat bet size, and most bettors know what this is. This is simply a amount that you would wager if you had to wager the exact same amount every single bet, right? So it would never change from one bet to another. Now, realistically, this is something that we don't necessarily want to do. We want to get into a dynamic betting strategy. But for the simplicity of this video and this explanation, we're going to assume that we are just flat betting, okay? That we just have a fixed and a flat bet size that we are betting at. So let's get into the actual math of profiting, right? The actual math of sports betting. You see on the right here, I have 10 lines of mathematics, and here I have some definitions. So let's go over these definitions first. The probability that W sub I equals 1. This is the handicapped probability of a win. This is what every sports bettor is really trying to find, right? What are the odds of such and such happening? What is the probability of this event happening, right? The side that you pick of a bet, what is the probability that that side comes true, right? This is what every sports bettor wants to know. This is what every sports bettor assumes that they do know, right? Now, most sports bettors put too high of a number and they assume it's about 80 to 90% probability when that is not true and unrealistic, but that's a conversation we'll get into on another day. WI is 1 or 0. It's the binarized outcome of the bet. So if we win the bet, this number, this variable is going to be 1. If we lose the bet, this variable is going to be 0. S is the sportsbook's implied probability, and we're going to assume this is fixed, okay? Now, again, obviously this is not necessarily a realistic situation. We would not just bet at one set of odds, but for simplicity, we're going to assume that we're just betting at a fixed set of odds, okay? And this is okay to do because we can simply generalize this to other odds later on. So everything that we talk about here applies to any set of odds. P is the empirical or the odds adjusted win rate. This is the empirical proportion of bets that we're winning at this fixed set of odds. This is what most sports bettors report when they say their win rate. But again, in order for this to be relevant, we have to talk about the odds that we're betting at. Delta $, this is obviously just the net change in our bankroll. We obviously want this to be greater than 0, which implies that we're making money. If it's less than 0, then we're losing money. N is the number of bets placed. For some people, this is 100. For other people, it's 10. For other people, it's 10,000. It doesn't matter. It's just a finite number of bets that we place. B is our flat bet size. Again, this is the amount that we'll bet, assuming that we're going to bet the same amount every single time. I is just the index denoting the number of the bet that we're on, the ith bet out of n, right? So we start with this top equation up here, right? Line number 1, delta $ equals this quantity, the reciprocal of the implied probability minus 1 times the bet size times W sub I, right? And this might seem a little complicated, but I defined it this way for a reason. This equation is very nice, okay, for a sports bettor. This equation tells you your net change in your bankroll for just about every bet type. Okay, so any bet type that you want to use, you can plug into this equation, and over a series of bets, it'll tell you how much you're gaining or losing depending on your empirical win proportion. So line number 2 comes from distributing this B times W sub I term, right? We're going to distribute this into this quantity, and then we're going to distribute this B term into this quantity over here. And that is how we get line number 2. Line number 4 comes from canceling out these B, W sub I terms that we see in line number 3. To get to line number 5, we're simply going to factor out the B term that we have in line number 4. So we're going to take this B and we're factoring it out to the front of the equation. Line number 6 is actually 2 steps in one. So what we're doing here is we're going to factor out the reciprocal of the implied probability, and we're going to distribute the summation across these two terms, right? And that's going to give us line number 6. Line number 7 is us just dividing by the number of bets that we're placing. So you'll notice that we're looking currently at the total change in our bankroll, right? The net change in bankroll. Well, we can simply divide by the number of bets placed, and what we're looking at now is the average gained or lost per bet, okay? The average amount gained or lost per wager. And when we have this line number 7 right here, we're going to do a few substitutions. So we'll notice here we have this sum of W sub I over N, right? This summation of W sub I over the number of bets placed. And we come down here to line number 8 and we notice that that is just the empirical proportion of bets won. That is just the relative frequency of bets that we're winning at, okay? So we're going to call that P, okay? We're going to call that variable P. And we're actually going to make that substitution into this equation. N over N is obviously just 1, and we're going to make that substitution as well. So that gives us line number 9. We have that the average change in bankroll per bet is just the bet size times P over S minus 1, right? That is the empirical proportion of bets won divided by the implied probability minus 1. And we notice that this is greater than 0 if and only if P is greater than S, right? That's because if it's less than S, then this fraction becomes less than 1. And our average change in our bankroll now becomes negative, in which case we're losing money. So P greater than S implies that we're winning money, okay? That's what we have to do in order to make money. And that is to say that our empirical win proportion is greater than the implied probability of the odds that we're betting at. So this is the regular notion of positive EV betting that most bettors kind of understand, right? This is kind of what you'll see in a lot of comment sections when people say, you have to win at such and such amount. This is where the 52.38% comes from for the standard minus 110 odds on a spread bet. Okay, this is where that comes from. Now, this is somewhat well known, but the question still remains, how do we make that happen, right? How do we make sure P is greater than S? And this is the part that nobody really speaks about. P greater than S implies that your empirical win proportion is greater than the implied probability. How do we make that happen? Well, you'll notice up here that P is actually a partial sum of probabilities that we're assigning to these bets, okay? The average probability that we assign to these bets will actually converge to the empirical win proportion, assuming that we have somewhat of a calibrated process. Again, this is assuming that our process is calibrated. Okay, this is true under the condition that our process of generating such probabilities is indeed calibrated. Long term, our average probabilities will converge to the empirical win proportion. And this is good news because this tells us how to actually make sure that P is greater than S and how we can actually guarantee that we will make money long term, or how we can increase or maximize the likelihood that we're actually profiting long term and we're making money on average per bet. Okay, so it all comes down to this term right here, this 1 over n times the probability that W sub I equals 1. Again, that's the handicapped probability, right? Looking back at this definition up here, we're trying to handicap this number right here. We're trying to find this probability. So assuming we do that, and assuming that we have this, right, that we have a calibrated process and that our assigned probabilities do indeed converge to the empirical win proportion, what we're going to find is that our average change per bet is greater than 0 under this condition, because the probabilities that we assign converge to the empirical win proportion, which is greater than the implied probability of the odds that we're betting at. This directly implies that our average change per bet is positive, i.e., we're making money betting sports. And this is how it works, guys. This is how making money in sports betting actually works, okay? It's not a trick. It's not a fugazi. It's not a scam. It's not something that is beyond the capacity of most people. It's just mathematics, okay? So when you hear people talk about having some type of secret to sports betting, or what's your secret, or, being against Vegas, all of that doesn't make any sense. It's just mathematics, okay? It's simply understanding the probabilities, the odds, being able to price correctly, and having a calibrated process of generating these probabilities. That is what it is, okay? That is what sports betting actually is. Again, it is a game of calibration, not picking winners. So if we do this and everything works out, then our average change per bet, the average change in our bankroll per bet, is greater than 0, and we are making money betting sports. Voila. So under large numbers, the empirical proportion of bets won will almost surely converge to the theoretical proportion. That is to say that under a large number, under a sufficient number of bets, we can almost guarantee that this is going to happen, okay? This will happen if our process is calibrated. That's what all of this hinges on, is having a calibrated process. The more bets you place, the closer this number here will converge to your empirical win proportion, okay? That's how it works. That's why it's a patience man's game. Thus, to profit, right, to make money betting sports, we should attempt to derive a probability that W equals 1. That's what we want to find. We want to find this probability that W sub I equals 1. And we want this probability to be greater than the implied probability, right? And we want it to be such that it converges to the empirical win proportion. Again, that will happen assuming that we have a calibrated process. And this is why I defined sharp the way I did, right? If somebody is sharp, well, naturally, this will happen, right? This will happen naturally if you are a sharp bettor. So again, our primary goal as sharp bettors is to derive this probability right here, right? If we find this probability, then we are making money. Handicapping is the process of assigning a normalized probability. Normalized just means that they sum to 1, right? Our probabilities have to be normalized. The sports books do not have that constraint, right? They charge a juice, the vig. They don't have to be normalized. That's what we're trying to overcome, and that is the challenge of betting sports. Handicapping is the process of assigning a normalized probability to each side of a bet such that over the long term, the empirical win proportion of the chosen side exceeds its implied probability. Handicapping is not about picking winners. I see this a lot on all forms of social media. People have this idea that handicapping is about picking winners and going on these long winning streaks, right? Again, it's nice when that happens, but that is not what a true handicapper does, okay? A handicapper is somebody who knows how to put a number or a degree of certainty on each side of a bet. Okay, again, it coincides with what a sharp sports bettor is. A sharp sports bettor is a skilled handicapper. And I defined it that way because it's not about picking winners or hitting these large parlays. It's about putting a number on your degree of certainty. Okay, so everything comes together when you understand how all of this works, right? Value is essentially a bet with a significant discrepancy between its implied probability and a bettor's derived probability that drives the bet's empirical win proportion to a value exceeding its implied probability. Okay, so we have to drive our empirical win proportions at any set of odds to be greater than the implied probability of those odds. Okay, and we do this for any set of odds that we're betting at. This is how sports betting works, okay? This is why at a spread of minus 110, you have to hit at 52.38% in order to make money long term, right? So how do we make that happen? How do we make sure that we're hitting at a 52.38% or higher? Again, it comes down to putting a number on it, a degree of certainty. If your degree of certainty, say, is 75%, then naturally, if you're calibrated, you will make money because you're going to overshoot the 52.38%. You're going to achieve 52.38% easily if your process is calibrated. So understanding this is really what it means to be a sharp sports bettor. If you understand these 10 lines of mathematics, I will say honestly that I would say that you're probably better than 90 to 95% of sports bettors. If you understand these 10 lines of mathematics and you understand that the actual objective of sports betting is not to pick winners, but to put a number on your degree of certainty on each side of a bet. If you understand that concept, then you're better than 90 to 95% of handicappers or sports bettors. And you don't have to believe me. This is just what the math says, right? This is not me saying this to try to convince you of something. This is not me making an argument for anything. This is simply what the math says. So it's not me trying to brag or say anything. It's just me showing you that this is what it actually means to be a good sports bettor, right? This is the mathematical breakdown of how to make money betting sports. As they say, numbers don't lie. And if you know anything about this community and how this sports betting community works, you know that a lot of these so-called handicappers do lie. These guys lie all the time, right? It's constant lying on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. All you see is these guys lying about their win rates, how good they are in sports betting, but none of them actually understand the math or the actual mathematical breakdown of what it means to be profitable, okay? Numbers don't lie. These guys do. So understand the mathematics behind it, and you'll always be okay in sports betting. And furthermore, as far as being a sharp bettor goes, this answers a lot of questions for us regarding, can you actually make money betting sports? Does it make sense to sell picks? Does it make sense to buy picks? Should you be betting parlays? Are parlays ever profitable? When is a parlay profitable? Should you buy points on a spread? Should you bet the spread or should you bet the money line? All of these questions in sports betting are answered by understanding the mathematics. So when I'm seeing all these videos about, people having all these questions and debates going back and forth about sports betting, it's silly, okay? It's frivolous, because all you have to do is follow the mathematics, and everything tells you what you need to know. Can you make money betting sports? Yeah, mathematically you can. What is required to do that? Well, a calibrated process to generate your probabilities. Does it make sense to bet parlays? It depends on your degree of certainty. All of these questions are simply answered by understanding the mathematics. And that is what it means to profit in sports betting, is understanding the math and understanding the underlying mechanisms of what is going on. So that is it, guys. That is really what it means to understand profitable sports betting and positive EV betting. Again, most bettors have a very watered down understanding of just what this is, okay? But this is the actual breakdown of what's going on. You will make money if your process is calibrated and you're hitting at a rate greater than your implied probability, right? That is positive EV betting. And the beauty of this is that it works for every bet type, right? One-way market, two-way market, straight bets, money line, spread bets, round robin, parlays, any bet type can be conceptualized mathematically and broken down mathematically if you know what you're doing. So that is it, guys. That is how you actually do positive EV betting and how you actually make money betting sports. A lot of anything that I speak about will be built on understanding this. So if you understand this, then you're good to go. So hopefully this was clear, this made sense, and you guys got something from it and it answered some of your questions. Feel free to like, share, drop a comment down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.